Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're heading to the front lines, but we're not exactly dodging bullets out here.
More like dodging outdated ideas.
Exactly. We're talking about military strategy and not just any strategy. We're going old school.
Like really old school. Think early 1800s, Napoleonic Wars, muskets and cannons.
We're cracking open Carl von Clausewitz On War.
The book that's practically a sacred text in military circles.
You hear Clausewitz and you think, this guy's a legend, but is it still relevant today? That's what we're here to find out.
Especially for our listeners out there, the folks in uniform, on the ground, making decisions that matter. These ideas are far from ancient history.
Right. This isn't just dusty history. This is about understanding the DNA of conflict itself.
Precisely. So we're in Book 4, Chapters 5 and 6. Clausewitz is getting into the nitty-gritty of combat, what it's for, how long it lasts, all that good stuff. And he starts with something that might surprise you. He says combat isn't always about completely destroying the enemy.
Wait, really? I always figured it was all about total annihilation. Take out the other side as completely as possible.
Well, he's not saying that's wrong exactly. He acknowledges that eliminating the enemy's ability to wage war is like the ultimate goal.
Okay, that makes sense.
But then he digs deeper. He's like, hold on, there's nuance here. He talks about these different objectives within a battle.
So it's more about achieving a specific objective even within a larger conflict.
You got it. Sometimes, yeah, it is about wiping out the enemy force. That's the classic battle, right?
Yeah.
But he says sometimes it's about capturing a strategic point, a bridge, a supply depot, something like that. Or
Right.
maybe it's about disrupting their communication, forcing them to retreat. There's options.
So you might say taking that key piece of land, even if you don't wipe out their entire army, could be enough to cripple their ability to function.
Exactly, like cutting off the head of the snake. And Clausewitz also talks about the difference between offense and defense. On the offensive, you're trying to take something, to seize the initiative. On the defensive, you're trying to hold the line, to deny the enemy their objective.
So even back then, with muskets and cannons, it wasn't just about charging blindly into battle. There was some actual thought going into it.
Oh, absolutely. This was strategy, planning, thinking several moves ahead. And this all ties directly into what Clausewitz says about the duration of combat, which honestly is where things get really fascinating.
Because he's saying how long a battle lasts matters as much as who wins or loses in the end. I can see how that's important, but was that like a revolutionary concept back then?
You know, it seems obvious now, but back then, Clausewitz was really emphasizing the strategic implications of time. And he's saying a swift victory, that's always the best case scenario. Catches the enemy off guard, demoralizes them.
That element of surprise hit him hard and fast.
Exactly, and this is a big but, he also points out that a longer fight, even for the side that ultimately loses, can still have its own strategic value.
You're saying even if you know you can't win a particular fight, holding out might allow you to achieve a larger objective.
Exactly. It could buy time for reinforcements to arrive, wear down the enemy, disrupt their timetable. Every minute you hold on, you're changing the equation.
So how did Clausewitz back in the 1800s figure out how long a battle should last? Did they have some kind of mathematical formula back then?
Well, not a formula exactly. More like educated guesses based on experience. He'd seen a lot of battles, and he was paying attention to the patterns. He looked at the size of the armies, the terrain, the mix of infantry, cavalry, artillery.
So less about plugging numbers into a computer, more about boots-on-the-ground knowledge.
Precisely. He was saying, look, here's what I've seen play out on the battlefield. These are the things that matter. He'd look at a situation and say, okay, a division of this size, defending this kind of terrain with this type of firepower, they can probably hold out for, say, 6 hours. It's about predicting, as best you can, how long you can hold the line.
Anticipating what the enemy can throw at you.
Exactly. And then, here's where it gets really interesting. He connects these estimates to reinforcements. If you've got a pretty good idea how long your guys can hold out, even if they're outnumbered or outgunned,
You can have fresh troops ready to go, rolling in at just the right moment to turn the tide.
bingo. That's pure Clausewitz, that coordination, that understanding of how time can be a weapon in itself.
It's like he's taking us beyond the immediate battle and showing us the whole chessboard.
Exactly. And remember how he talked about those different types of combat, those different objectives?
Yeah, like going for total annihilation or maybe just taking a key position or even just forcing the enemy to make a mistake.
He actually ranks those objectives, saying some are more decisive than others. Meaning, wiping out the enemy's force, that's the ultimate victory, right? But, like, just holding a position for a little while, Even if it's tactically important in the moment, that's not going to win you the war.
So you're saying sometimes you got to play the long game.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
But Clausewitz also wants commanders to be thinking, okay, how does this smaller engagement, this one battle, fit into the overall strategy? Don't just react to what the enemy's doing. Take the initiative whenever you can.
Because if you're always on the defensive, you're letting the enemy control the clock.
And that can be exhausting, for your resources, for morale. Clausewitz understood that even a successful defense, if it drags on too long, can turn into a defeat.
So how does all of this apply to our listeners today? The modern military, the way wars are fought now. I mean, Clausewitz was writing nearly 200 years ago.
Yeah, the battlefield has changed a bit since the 1800s. We're talking drones, cyber warfare, the whole 9 yards, stuff Clausewitz couldn't have imagined. Totally different world in a lot of ways. But here's the thing. Those core principles that Clausewitz talked about, they're still relevant. They're still the foundation.
So we're not saying dust off your old copy of On War and you got the magic bullet.
Definitely not. But understanding your objectives, using time as a weapon, knowing how long you can hold out, that's more important than ever in modern warfare. Things happen fast these days, right? You got to be able to think on your feet.
So how does a modern military mind, someone listening to us right now, actually apply these Clausewitzian concepts? Let's say they're in a firefight, things are getting intense.
Yeah.
What should be going through their head?
I think the most important thing always is to remember the bigger picture. Even when the bullets are flying, you got to be able to step back and ask, what are we trying to achieve here? How does this firefight, this little piece of the action, fit into the overall plan?
It's like in those war movies, right? They pull back from the action and you see the whole battlefield. Suddenly it all makes sense.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask questions. If an order doesn't make sense, ask for clarification. Clausewitz himself talked about how important it is to use your own judgment, especially in the chaos of battle.
So be more than just a soldier following orders. Be a thinking warrior.
Right. Because today's battlefield, it demands that. You need to be able to adapt, think critically, and make decisions under pressure.
So more than 200 years later, what's the biggest lesson we can take from Clausewitz? What's the one thing our listeners should really take to heart?
I'd say, never forget the human element. Technology is important, sure, but war, at its core, is about people. It's about strategy, timing, and ultimately the will to win.
And those are things that never go out of style.
Absolutely.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today. To all our listeners out there, especially those serving in uniform, thank you. Thank you for your service, your sacrifice, and for all you do.
And remember, whether you're facing a tough situation on the battlefield or just trying to navigate a challenge in your everyday life, channel your inner Clausewitz. Think strategically, stay adaptable, and always keep the bigger picture in mind.
Great advice. And on that note, we'll see you next time for another deep dive.